There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being unable to stop thinking. Your body is still, but your mind is not. It reopens the past like an unresolved case, projects the future like an unspoken verdict, and freezes in the present like a guard who cannot abandon his post. It's 2 in the morning, the world is asleep, and all that remains is you and a stream of thoughts tightly coiled together, not loud but relentless, not explosive but eroding. You believe that if you analyze long enough, calculate carefully enough, you can avoid mistakes, avoid pain, avoid the moment where control slips away. But the more you think, the less you move, like running at full speed on a machine that goes nowhere. Overthinking is not intelligence. It is fear disguised as logic. And when the mind becomes a place of confinement, you are both the warden and the prisoner. And the most dangerous part isn't that you think too much, but that no one ever taught you that what's destroying you today was once designed to protect you. To understand this, you need to stop seeing overthinking as a bad habit and start seeing it as a survival mechanism placed in the wrong environment. The human brain was not designed for peace, it was designed for survival. For hundreds of thousands of years, its primary job was to detect danger as early as possible, because in the ancestral world, a delay of even 1 second could mean death. When our ancestors heard a vague sound in the bushes, they had 2 choices: assume it was the wind and keep walking, or assume it was a predator and run. The ones who survived were those who consistently assumed the worst. That logic is still embedded in your brain today. The problem is that the world has changed, but the brain has not. In the past, danger was concrete. A wild animal, a storm, a visible enemy. The threat appeared, passed, and the body was allowed to return to rest. Today, your threats have no clear shape. They are an unanswered email, a message without context, an unreadable look in a meeting, a future without guarantees. These threats never fully resolve. They hover just enough to paralyze action, but intensely enough to keep the alarm system running. Faced with uncertainty, the brain does the only thing it knows how to do. It fills in the gaps with assumptions, and because it is wired for survival, those assumptions are almost always negative. Overthinking emerges here, not because you enjoy suffering, but because your brain believes that constant analysis, prediction, and rehearsal of worst-case scenarios will protect you from pain. It is like an alarm system that would rather scream all night than risk missing a real threat. What the brain fails to recognize is that in the modern world, most of these threats never materialize, yet your body reacts as if they are real. Your heart rate rises, your muscles tense, your nervous system remains locked in fight or flight mode. You are not running from any predator, but you are never allowed to rest either. At its deepest level, overthinking is an outdated survival reflex, quietly draining your life force day by day. But if overthinking were purely a problem of the brain, then everyone would overthink in the same way. That's not what we see. Some people face the same ambiguity, the same unclear message, the same uncertain future, and still sleep peacefully while you lie awake all night. The difference isn't intelligence. It's where the brain learned to interpret danger early in life. For some, uncertainty is simply missing information. For you, it's an alarm signal. This pattern often begins in childhood, where core beliefs about safety and self-worth are formed. When a child grows up in an environment where love, approval, or peace depends on doing things right, being well-behaved, or meeting expectations, the brain is forced to develop heightened vigilance. The child learns to monitor subtle shifts in tone, facial expression, and mood in order to adjust behavior. Not because the child is overly sensitive, but because this vigilance is the only way to feel safe. Over time, that mechanism doesn't disappear as the child grows older, it changes form. The child who fears disappointing their parents becomes the adult who fears displeasing their boss. The child who learned that mistakes lead to punishment becomes the adult who believes mistakes lead to rejection. When someone like this encounters ambiguity, the brain doesn't just respond to the present situation, it reactivates emotional memories from the past. Overthinking, at this point, is no longer a response to reality, but a desperate attempt to prevent an old wound from reopening. That's why you're not just worried about an email, a meeting, or a relationship. Beneath the constant mental noise lies a deeper question, one you rarely articulate. If I get this wrong, if I'm not good enough, will I still be accepted? Overthinking becomes the way you try to answer that question before the world has a chance to answer it for you. And in that effort to protect yourself, you slowly lose the ability to fully inhabit the present moment. At a deeper level, overthinking is not just a reaction to fear, it is a sophisticated illusion of control. When faced with uncertainty, humans struggle to tolerate the feeling of powerlessness. Continuous thinking provides something addictive, the sense that you are doing something. You believe that analyzing, predicting, and rehearsing worst-case scenarios is responsible preparation, that if you suffer early enough, the pain will be easier to bear when it arrives. But the brain quietly swaps meanings. It blurs the line between preparation and self-inflicted torment, between responsibility and the fear of losing control. Biologically, overthinking keeps the stress system activated. Your body releases cortisol and adrenaline as if a real threat were present. But unlike our ancestors, you don't run, fight, or escape. The energy is mobilized but never discharged. It accumulates as fatigue, irritability, insomnia, and a persistent sense of exhaustion with no clear cause. You don't collapse because of external events. You collapse because you've lived too long in a state of readiness for a disaster that never arrives. This illusion of control is especially dangerous because it disguises itself as rationality. Overthinking makes you feel cautious, thoughtful, responsible, while in reality it drains your capacity to act. You don't procrastinate because you're lazy, you procrastinate because your brain believes that thinking a little more will make you safer. But the harder you try to control the future through thought, the more you lose the present. In the end, overthinking doesn't protect you from pain, it simply prolongs and multiplies pain inside your imagination. But there is an even more uncomfortable truth. Overthinking is not only about control, it is also a sophisticated way of avoiding feeling. When you think non-stop, your mind becomes so noisy that there is no space left for emotions to surface. This is not accidental. For many people, real emotions are more frightening than any worst-case scenario. Loneliness, inadequacy, shame, or the fear of abandonment arrive quietly, but when you slow down, they become impossible to ignore. Overthinking turns into mental static, a thick fog that prevents you from sitting with those feelings. At this level, excessive thinking is no longer about solving problems, it is about creating distance from yourself. You analyze, speculate, and question endlessly, not because you need answers, but because if your mind stops, you would have to face an uncomfortable inner emptiness. The mental noise becomes a form of anesthesia. It feels safer to drown in hundreds of hypothetical scenarios than to admit something simple and painful, that you are sad, afraid, or deeply lonely. In depth psychology, Carl Jung referred to these rejected emotional parts as the shadow, the aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. What is pushed out of awareness does not disappear, it returns in another form. For many people, that form is overthinking. You believe you are battling the future, but in reality, you are avoiding an emotion in the present. You think you are analyzing others, your work, or your life, but underneath, you are trying not to feel unworthy, unsafe, or unlovable. At its deepest level, overthinking is an attempt not to feel, but the cost of that avoidance is high. When you use thinking to escape emotion, you don't just avoid pain, you also block joy, connection, and vitality. You don't become more stable, you become more numb. And that numbness quietly feeds the cycle, pushing you to think even more just to feel that you still exist. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They try to end overthinking by fighting it. They force themselves to be more positive, to think less, to calm down. But the harder they try to control their thoughts, the more aggressively the mind pushes back. Because overthinking is not an enemy to be eliminated. It is a signal that something inside you needs to be seen, but has never been fully heard. The real exit is not about stopping thoughts, but about changing your position in relation to them. Most of the time, you live as if you are your thoughts. When an anxious thought appears, you believe it, follow it, and let it pull you along. But a thought, no matter how convincing it feels, is only a mental event. It is not the truth, and it is not you. The moment you can step back and notice I am having an anxious thought instead of I am anxious, the structure of overthinking begins to shift. Here, Stoic philosophy and mindfulness converge on a crucial point. You cannot control which thoughts arise, but you can choose how you respond to them. You cannot stop a cloud from passing through the sky, but you don't have to chase it. When you stop identifying with every thought, space begins to open in the mind. And in that space, emotions can be felt without being analyzed, fixed, or pushed away. This requires a different kind of courage, the courage to stay with uncertainty, with unresolved sadness, with the discomfort of not being in control. Yet this is precisely what allows the nervous system to settle. When the brain learns that you can feel without collapsing, that you can lack control and still be safe, it no longer needs to scream through overthinking. Peace, then, does not come from thinking better, but from no longer being ruled by thought in the same way. But understanding alone is not enough, because when overthinking truly takes over, rational thought is usually the first thing to disappear. In those moments, you don't need more analysis. You need anchors that are simple enough to pull your mind back to the present. Not to control your thoughts, but to remind your nervous system of one essential fact. Right now, you are safe. These anchors are not meant to heal you instantly. They are meant to keep you from being swept away while the wave passes. The first anchor is externalizing your thoughts. When everything stays in your head, it becomes vague and more threatening than it actually is. Writing is not about solving the problem. It's about breaking the loop. Once a thought is on paper, you no longer have to carry it inside your mind. You begin to see that you are having thoughts rather than being completely possessed by them. The second anchor is containing worry within time. Overthinking becomes overwhelming because it invades every moment. By assigning it a specific window, you send a clear signal to the brain: this concern has been acknowledged, but it is not allowed to dominate your entire day. Paradoxically, when worry is permitted within limits, it often loses its intensity. The third anchor is returning to the body. The mind can wander endlessly through past and future, but the body always exists in the present. By paying attention to breath, physical sensations, and surrounding sounds, you shift the nervous system out of imagined danger and back into direct experience. This is not avoidance of thought, but a reminder that thoughts are only one small part of reality, not the whole of it. These anchors do not eliminate overthinking forever, but each time you use them, you teach the brain something new, that you do not need to think yourself into exhaustion in order to be safe. And it is this slow, repeated learning that gradually weakens the grip of the overthinking cycle. In the end, what matters most is not learning how to stop overthinking, but learning how to live with it without being ruled by it. Overthinking does not disappear simply because you understand it, nor because you try to push it away. It softens when you stop treating it as a flaw to be fixed and begin seeing it as part of the human experience, born from fear, from the desire to feel safe, from the wish not to be hurt again. Life, at its deepest level, is inherently uncertain. No amount of thinking can guarantee that you will never make mistakes, never lose, never be rejected. And here lies the paradox. The more you try to eliminate uncertainty, the more anxious you become. When you stop demanding that your mind predict everything, when you stop requiring perfect answers, a different kind of freedom emerges. Not freedom from thought, but freedom from being dominated by thought. You are not the scenarios playing in your head. You are the one witnessing them come and go. Just as the sky does not need to force clouds to disappear, you do not need to eliminate thoughts in order to find peace. Peace arises when you stop clinging to every idea, every assumption, every fear as if it defines who you are. When you allow yourself to be wrong, to be uncertain, to let life unfold without complete control, overthinking slowly loses its purpose. There will still be sleepless nights. There will still be moments when the mind spirals. That does not mean you are failing. It simply means you are alive. And each time you notice yourself being pulled away, then gently return to the present, you are doing something profound. You are choosing presence over control. Perhaps that is the deepest and most sustainable form of peace a human being can reach. If at any point in this video you felt as if your own thoughts were being spoken out loud, know that you are not alone. There are many people quietly living inside the same silent loops, showing up to life, functioning on the surface, while their minds never truly rest. The fact that you recognized yourself here, the fact that you stayed until the end, already suggests that something in you is beginning to shift. If you want, take a moment to write down the thought that has been repeating most often in your mind lately, not to analyze it, not to fix it, but simply to acknowledge that it exists. And if it feels safe, you may share it in the comments. Not to be solved, but to be seen. Because sometimes what lightens the load is not an answer, but the realization that you are not carrying everything alone. Thank you for spending this time here, in this quiet space. We'll meet again in future conversations, where we continue to look directly at the human mind, without judgment, without avoidance, simply to understand more clearly how we live and how we experience this world. Before you leave, there's just one simple thing to remember. The next time you notice your mind starting to race again, don't rush to fix it and don't try to silence it. Just pause for a moment and notice this. You are safe right now. Not every thought needs an answer, and not every fear needs to be solved immediately. Sometimes all that's needed is to stay, breathe one beat slower, and allow things to pass. Like clouds moving across the sky without you having to do anything at all.